You're listening to the Unlocking Africa podcast.
Although private equity has definitely a role to play in terms of long-term investing, it isn't always necessarily the best instrument. We started it as a network building exercise. The founding team and I were three ladies. We're all in the private equity space, and we just wanted to do more for the industry than what's in our job description. For every $1 invested in a woman startup, $25 goes to men in the African startup space. We don't just see investing in women as a good thing to do, but also a smart investment decision to make. We have a definite preference for majority women-employed businesses.
Stay tuned as we bring you inspiring people who are unlocking Africa's economic potential. You're listening to the Unlocking Africa podcast with your host, Tessa Adamu.
Welcome to the Unlocking Africa podcast, where we find amazing people who are doing amazing things to unlock Africa's economic potential. Today, we have Maya Burney, who is the founder of Womvest, which is a network of women professionals, investors, and entrepreneurs that create value for one another through connections, collaborations, mentorship, and investment. Welcome to the podcast. Maya, how are you?
Thanks so much. It's fantastic to be here. I'm doing very, very well.
Fantastic. So where are you at the moment?
I'm in Johannesburg, South Africa, enjoying a beautiful summer. But unfortunately, load shedding is a real problem at the moment.
Yeah, it's a shame. So hopefully we can carry out this conversation with no interruptions. But I guess that's some of the challenges of doing business in Africa, but one that I guess you're more than experienced navigating.
Yeah, look, I think that's why African startups and businesses are some of the most resilient in the world, because we have these challenges, and despite them, we end up still thriving. So
Brilliant. I agree. So I'm not sure if you've listened to the podcast before. I usually like to start from the beginning. So I was hoping before we get started, you could introduce yourself and tell us a bit more about Maya Burney.
Yeah, so I've spent the past 6 years in the private equity space, transacting on small cap private equity deals, not only in Africa, but also globally. And it didn't take me 6 years to realize a number of things. The first one, that the space was quite undiversified. And although I was in rooms with men who are fantastic men, they tended to invest in people that looked like them.
Yes.
And so I felt a real deep desire to, in my own personal capacity, even if it was small, to change that dynamic and encourage more flows of women investing in women, which is really where the concept of Womvest stemmed from, which is short for Women Investing in Women. And really, it's a network of women investment professionals and women entrepreneurs. The other thing that I noticed in the investment space was even the women that are in the investment space are not speaking to entrepreneurs. We tend to stay in our silo. I think men are much better at networking than women are, but to encourage more cross-sector collaboration so that the business builders of this world are also interacting with the allocators of capital. And so the third thing I noticed in the space over the past few years was, although private equity has definitely a role to play in terms of long-term investing, it isn't always necessarily the best instrument for entrepreneurs to be raising. A lot of the times, entrepreneurs are diluted very early on in their business, and it becomes quite difficult to raise subsequent rounds without them being further and further diluted. And so looking at how we can play with financial instruments to create non-dilutionary capital that really supports the entrepreneurs behind their business.
Awesome. Thank you for that. So you've given us a great insight into who you are in terms of your work in the private equity space in South Africa and globally, and that you saw a lack of investment in women entrepreneurs and also exploring the alternative financial instruments that were suitable to invest in some of those ventures. Mm-hmm. So as you mentioned, you are the founder of Womvest. So I was hoping if you could give us a bit more detail in terms of talk us through what the company does, why you started it, and what you hope to eventually achieve in the near future.
Yeah, so Womvest was started about going on 2 years ago now. And the founding team and I were three ladies. We're all in the private equity space. And really, we just wanted to do more for the industry than what's in our job descriptions as deal makers or transactors, and encourage more women to hold spaces and to own spaces in the industry. And so we started it as a community or a network building exercise. And we are still doing that in terms of providing mentorship support to up and coming women in the space, upskilling opportunities in terms of workshops, networking events, and the like. And then we realized as we were building this community that in order for us to really provide value, we needed to have a investment component. And so we've got Womvest, the community, but then we've also got Womvest Ventures, which is that alternative investment platform.
So you detailed there how you aim to encourage more women to hold a position or interest in the space. So I was hoping, can you give us some numbers so that those listening understand how much work still needs to be done to improve the underrepresentation of women in Africa's investment ecosystem and just the underfunding of entrepreneurship?
Yeah, I mean, it is encouraging to see that the numbers are getting healthier over the years, but we're still in quite a minority position.
Yes.
There's a stat recently published by the World Bank that reported for every $1 invested in a woman or a woman startup, $25 goes to men in the African startup space.
Okay.
And I think Partech also recently published a stat that showed that companies founded or co-founded by African women, many of which noting that have international alliances or networks, drew 16% of the total $5.2 billion raised on the continent last year for startups. So there is clearly, I think many people in sort of the gender lens investment space like to look at this as an arbitrage opportunity, because if half of the population is being underfunded, there clearly are gems that are being overlooked and value left on the table. And so we don't just see investing in women as a good thing to do, but also a smart investment decision to make.
Thank you for that, Maya. So it's clear to see that progress has been made, but there still is a long way to go. Something that you touched on earlier, can you talk us through some of the initiatives and activities that Womvest coordinates to empower women investors and entrepreneurs?
Yeah, so we have quite a few sub-communities within our network. One such community that speaks to each other is women who are in positions of leadership and in positions of wanting to give back or paying it forward to the up and coming generation of leaders in the space. And we have engaged with them as mentors. And really, these women have very limited time, but they want to give back. So what we've done is we've said, okay, within our mentorship program, let us solve this problem for you by matching you to driven and dedicated mentees. And we say to the mentees, we're matching you with value-adding mentors for a period of 3 months. And what we do as the Womvest team is we guide them through this 3-month process. And we provide skills to the mentees that the mentors don't really want to do. Things like resume editing, CV editing, interview prep, and we leave the mentors to provide that value in terms of insight and experience that is so crucial. So that whole program is called the Womvest Mentorship Matching Program, and it's run by Anesu Shoko, who is the head of mentorship at Womvest. So that's our flagship program. Other activities within the community revolve around, as I said before, exclusive networking opportunities, workshops for skills development such as cash flow management for entrepreneurs, or even career opportunities for the younger students within our network as well. So that's what we do on the community building side. And all of that really feeds into the ventures portion as well. I mean, that they speak to one another so that as we identify entrepreneurs within our network, we also are able to funnel them towards potential investment opportunities.
Awesome. So you mentioned there is Womvest, which is the community side, and Womvest Ventures, which is more of a investment vehicle that is part of Womvest. Looking at the investment side, would it be possible to talk us through Womvest Ventures in terms of how it operates, how you allocate capital to some of these entrepreneurs or startups?
Absolutely. So we knew from the get-go we wanted to play in the alternative investment space. And when I talk about that, I mean particularly within non-dilutive instruments. So we looked at debt or debt-like instruments. Typically, when people think about debt, sometimes they have an aversion to it, mostly entrepreneurs.
Very true.
But in fact, I think it's a really underutilized instrument that can really work for entrepreneurs. And we do a lot of education on debt and actually different types of instruments and when to use them in your business. But our particular instrument is called an impact-linked debt facility. What we saw in the market, and I don't think this is just unique to South Africa, was there's a funding gap in terms of access to short-term working capital financing. In the South African market, for this type of capital, you're looking at rates of between 2 and 4% per month, which on an annualized basis is incredibly high. And it comes with all sorts of collateral requirements and very punitive terms and if you are late on your payments. And what we found is that in this particularly strained environment where entrepreneurs are struggling anyway, this really puts their margins under incredible strain. So what we tried to do was to provide financing in this particular type of financing at lower rates than market and try to secure it through partnerships with private equity houses or venture houses that are already invested in these entrepreneurs. So what we've done is we've said, okay, we're not necessarily providing third-party debt. We're actually providing add-on debt, and we don't take the same level of risk. Therefore, we can price this below market. And we don't have any collateral requirements because we are de-risking our investment. And we can then say, okay, let's be smart about how we incentivize achievements of impact. So let's add on the impact-linked mechanism by saying, right, within the period of the loan, if the entrepreneur is able to achieve 2 of the predetermined impact metrics that we stipulate in our loan agreement, and they repay the loan on time, we will then rebate them a portion of their interest at the end of the period. So we're sort of playing around with how we can de-risk debt,
yes,
and how we can use behavioral finance to incentivize impact outcomes.
Awesome. Thank you for that. Obviously, there's a funding gap in South Africa with regards to short-term lending. And when people do access those loans or investment instruments, there are high interest rates. So the capital that you provide is intended for businesses that are impact-linked. So I was wondering, what are your eligibility requirements for impact-linked investment loans?
Yeah, so we have obviously a definite preference for women-led or majority women-employed businesses, or businesses that are benefiting or have products or services that benefit women, being a gender-focused vehicle. However, we have also funded male-led businesses, but have made the impact KPIs specific around gender. So we think the two strategies actually go hand in hand, because if we are, not only do we want to fund women, but we also want to fund men who then employ and empower women. And so we're trying to be creative in terms of how we do that as well.
Brilliant. So is there any requirements in terms of size, turnover of company?
Yeah, so the target business, we're targeting this funding gap where businesses are too small for the banks, but too large for types of grant funding, etc. So this is kind of missing what they call the missing middle financing gap. So this is typically businesses with turnover of under 5 million Rand, and they are post-profit, but are in this particularly vulnerable growing phase in which they need, it's almost like purchase order financing in order to grow their business and their margin to the next level.
So when businesses access these loans, what type of business needs are you seeing typically being met when they access it? What are some of the pressing issues that they come to you for to say that they need to address financially?
So I'll give you an example. One of the women that we financed, she creates pomegranate juice, and she needs to buy pomegranates in order to manufacture pomegranate juice. But there's a lag time of about 2 to 3 months where she puts in that cash to purchase the pomegranates and then sells her pomegranate juice. And really, it's that purchase order financing stage, working capital, that we then are able to finance, which is typically quite a risky space in the market. What we're also seeing that is quite unique about the capital that we provide is technical assistance in terms of what does cash flow management actually mean? How do you manage your cash flow cycles? How do you enhance the usage of debt throughout your turnover on cash? And we do that with the entrepreneurs that we support. And we realize, they're busy running their businesses. It's a full-time job. It's very, very difficult, particularly in this climate. And they don't have the time or the energy to invest in this sort of knowledge. And I think the third thing that we sort of provide is also community. Being an entrepreneur can be very lonely.
Definitely.
So having access to a community of entrepreneurs who are also going through the same struggles as you is incredible, and also who might look like you and sound like you. It's also something that helps.
Thank you. You mentioned that what you offer is a form of working capital. So for those out there who don't quite understand what working capital is, can you break down what working capital is and what an affordable rate in South Africa would look like in terms of what you're offering?
Yeah, so when we talk about working capital, it's what you sort of need on a day-to-day basis to keep your operations running, as opposed to long-term capital, which might be capital expenditures such as buying equipment or making upgrades to a factory. Those are long-term types of capital requirements. Working capital financing is your day-to-day financing needs. And within that category, there's different types as well. The type that we're looking at, again, is purchase order financing. So how do you finance a very early stage conversion of future revenue, which is in the form of receiving purchase orders and needing to fulfill those?
The companies or the entrepreneurs that you work with, why do they choose to come to you instead of a traditional or established financial institution?
Yeah, look, I think there's a number of no-brainers. The first one is we're cheaper.
Brilliant.
The second one is we don't have as much red tape, so our collateral requirements are very light. We then are able to provide mentorship and expertise and guidance. And we're just a lot friendlier, I think, than your banking environment. So yeah, I think generally the women and men who have partnered with us in terms of Womvest Ventures have found their experience quite enjoyable.
Okay, so you make the process quicker and you do provide, I guess, a holistic approach and support and almost like a community feel to what you do. So how do businesses find out about what you do? How do you go about building your pipeline of companies, entrepreneurs that you work with?
Absolutely. And I think this is an important point because we don't have an open application process. Again, part of the reason why we're able to provide capital that is cheaper than the market is because we have de-risked our model by partnering with either accelerators or funds who've already invested long-term capital into these businesses. They're not able to provide this short-term working capital financing. And for them, their ability for their portfolio companies to grow over time depends on the health of their margins on a monthly basis. And so if they're able to access cheaper working capital finance, that's really great for these private equity fund managers, right? And typically, what we've seen on the market and the fact that the three of us at Womvest are from the private equity space, we see the need for this type of capital even for venture-backed or private equity-backed companies. So yeah, I would say that how we actually find our pipeline is through partnerships with these funds or accelerator programs. And that actually allows us not to be taking third-party risk, and so that we can price our instrument below market. So it's not an open application process.
So obviously you've de-risked your application in terms of who you work with through the partnerships that you've entered with different private equity or venture capital partners. In terms of risk or exposure to risk, do you have to deal with many defaults or missed payments? What is the process when something like that happens?
Yeah, so we, touch wood, have had no default to date.
Oh, amazing.
Yeah, no, I think part of that success is really the partnerships with private equity houses that are already invested in the entrepreneurs because, they've walked a journey with the entrepreneur already. They understand the nature of their businesses, they understand the risks, they understand the requirements. And so in collaboration with them, we're able to actually very, very significantly de-risk our capital and also deploy the capital in the amounts and in the time that is required or fit for the business. I think a lot of times entrepreneurs raise funding because they need it in the moment, but it's not actually good for them in the long term. And so we really, really try to deploy fit for purpose capital that actually works for the business and is optimizing for the business, as opposed to just filling a need in the moment.
Awesome. So through this, have you been able to measure the success or the impact your loans have had on individual businesses and communities in terms of, on average, how much have your typical customers or clients grown since accessing your loans or your support?
Yeah, look, we looked at a number of factors. So when we started the facility, prime has since increased in South Africa. So there's been actually a number of things that the SME sector has faced: inflation, rising interest rates, electricity shortages, and obviously global supply chain constraints as a result of Ukraine and just the global environment right now. So we are very much aware of the fact that the capital we've provided has been a very important source of breathing room for the entrepreneurs we supported. We verified that with them. And hopefully what we are aiming to do, we've only completing our first year of this facility. And so what we want to see over time is, okay, what has the turn been over time on the margins of these businesses?
Yes.
And what would that have looked like if they had had access to much more expensive capital? And so that's really where we'll see the impact of our facility versus what they could get on the market.
Brilliant, brilliant. So you've mentioned that you're just about to complete your first year and you've had a lot of success. And what you offer is genuinely innovative and different from a lot of loan or investment instruments facilities that I've come in contact with. So have you seen an increased demand in terms of people trying to access your services?
Yeah, I think interesting that you say access our services because we provide services for investors and also obviously services for the entrepreneurs that we provide capital to. In terms of the investor side, our instrument generates 10% over a 1-year commitment and on a very de-risked basis. If you look at the market in South Africa, for the level of risk that this instrument provides, 10% is quite a high yield.
Yes.
And so what we found is that our investors really enjoy that yield and the fact that also it's short term, it's just a 1-year commitment. So we're seeing quite a lot of interest from individuals to allocate to this sort of investment option, and particularly also because it's impact focused. So not only are you receiving a commercial yield or return, you're also supporting something that's impact driven. And obviously on the side of the entrepreneurs, access to this type of funding is a massive gap. I think the stat was SMEs in South Africa only get access to about 26% of total private sector funding. And that stat was provided by the OECD earlier this year. So in this particular economic environment, this kind of funding is in absolutely high demand. We're hoping that in our next facility, we can raise even more capital and perhaps concessionary funding, which will allow us on a blended basis to charge even less to the entrepreneurs that we're providing the financing to.
Okay, interesting. So you mentioned there that the facility is in high demand in the current economic condition that we're in. So has the economic, whatever you want to call it, downturn changed your approach or how you operate?
Yeah, I think we anticipated this from the beginning, right?
Okay, fantastic.
We're kind of in the same cycle. Again, we haven't even completed a full year. The South African economy was struggling even before we saw inflation rise even more and interest rates rise. So we know that just the demand for this type of facility has increased even more, which just makes our case stronger, I think, and hopefully we can attract more development type funding as opposed to just private funding for this kind of allocation.
So you kind of envisioned the challenges due to some of the constraints or challenges you were already seeing in the South African markets, and obviously we're seeing global challenges now. So what have been some of the challenges that you've faced in terms of being a fund that is focused on supporting women-led SMEs ventures in Africa?
So I think our interactions have been quite different. We started as a community. And so what's unique about us is that we didn't actually go into market from the get-go.
Okay.
We started building our community first. And once we got to a critical size, we basically just matched our investment group to an opportunity that we saw. So we saw, okay, we have this group of women in our network, almost like angels, really, who are looking for short-term yielding investment options and would love to support women-led businesses. And then we have this fantastic group of entrepreneurs in our network that are backed by a long-term equity funding. And we could then, create a mechanism around a de-risked model around these two parties to provide value to them. That's really what we've done from the get-go.
So was it not your initial plan to eventually start a fund, or was that something that just came about through the community?
Look, I think it was an inevitable progression. And I know a lot of my peers and women who are much more senior than me make the point that women do not need mentorship. They do not need training. They need money. Stop it with all the training. Give us money.
That's a very valid point.
So I think it was always in the back of our minds, but we wanted to really design a facility that was fit for purpose. And until we understood what women investing in women meant, like what are women wanting to invest in, like what type of instrument, and what type of capital do women entrepreneurs or just entrepreneurs need? Where's the gap? And so we didn't want to come in there and sort of, obviously there's a lot of research out there we could point to, but we wanted to hear it from the ground. And that's why I think building the community first was very important for us in designing the Womvest Ventures facility.
I think it's a very smart way to approach it, because I guess through the community, you understand people's genuine challenges and needs, which will then help you shape what the fund or facility looks like. Definitely agree with that approach. Are you looking to increase the size of the facility to serve more companies and offer larger loans at lower interest? What is the plan for the future for the facility?
Yeah, so I was on a webinar about 3 years ago now. And one thing a woman said to the panel, she said, find creative ways to build track record. And everyone always talks about track record, right? When you're raising, track record is so important. But how do you build track record when no one will invest in you? So for us, this first year has been track record building. So we can actually say at the end of it, okay, we created an innovative model that's de-risked. We invested, and we did that successfully. Now we've got a model that works and we believe is scalable. Here it is. And I think it's an opportune time for this type of capital. I think venture debt of all types is quite interesting right now. There's a lot of activity there. There's also a lot of activity in terms of gender lens and with a gender focus. So I'm quite confident about raising a facility that's much larger than this one, which would enable us to finance a lot more women than we're able to finance now and have perhaps a more open application process.
That sounds fantastic. So I guess you're fully embedded in understanding the investment space in terms of investing in women-led ventures. So with regards to that, what current trends in that space in terms of Africa's investment in entrepreneur ecosystem that is led by women, what trends are you currently excited about?
So I'm very excited about the intersection of climate and gender.
Awesome.
I think the world is waking up to the fact that investing in women is not just doing women a service or doing the world a service. It really is also about financial return and building a business case for that. But there is an intersection between climate and gender, which is very important. Women will be disproportionately affected by climate change than men, seeing as women tend to be more reliant on farming to feed their families, etc., on the African continent in particular. And so how do we create investment opportunities that are sensitive not only to gender, but also to climate? I haven't 100% got my head around yet, but I'm very excited about what comes out of that.
So I guess if we keep on the theme of the future of Africa, where do you see Africa in 5 years' time with regards to, say, women being represented in the investment ecosystem and also being invested in as business leaders?
Yeah, just one stat that I'd like to mention here is Africa contributes less than 4% to global greenhouse emissions.
Yes.
Yet it is the most affected by climate change. And it has the most to offer in terms of climate solutions.
Yes.
Given its richness of natural capital richness, really. I'm very excited for the future of Africa in the next 5 years. I think Africa has an incredibly important role to play in terms of climate resilience and building solutions around climate. I'd really like to see women in particular stepping up into this space and stepping into positions of leadership on a global scale in terms of fighting these complex problems that really are not in isolation to anyone. They're relevant to all of us, right?
Yes.
All of us as inhabitants of planet Earth. I mean, so yeah, I do feel that women are coming forward onto the global scene, and not only are women themselves creating spaces for women to enter or join the leadership arena, but also men. There have been fantastic men out there who understand the need for diversity of perspective and gender. Somebody actually who was on your podcast, Brendan Mullen from Caleo Capital.
Yes.
He, for example, is one of those who, Caleo Capital is a permanent capital investor. And we have provided loans to a number of his portfolio companies. And Caleo Capital invests mostly in women-led businesses, and his whole team is women. So that gives you an example of, I think men are really understanding the need for diversity.
Fantastic. Thank you for that. One thing that you did mention is in terms of your excitement with regards to women being involved in the climate space, providing climate solutions within Africa. So is the climate space something that you'll be looking closely at and hopefully supporting through Womvest or another one of your ventures?
Yeah, I mean, if you look at ESG, environmental, social, and governance factors, our impact linked mechanism to date has only looked at the social impact factors, and within social being primarily gender focused. So I would love to explore, and we're currently developing impact mechanisms that focus more broadly on ESG. So how do you incorporate impact incentives that incentivize environmental impact outcomes? We haven't done that to date. But again, if we were able to raise a larger facility that would target a broader set of entrepreneurs, we could certainly embed that into our instrument.
Fantastic. And I look forward to seeing that and hearing all about it. Where do you see yourself in Womvest in 5 years' time? What will you be doing?
That is interesting. If I had gone back 5 years, I would have never expected us to be where we are now, right? So I think I'm going to say the sky's the limit. And I really want to actually encourage all your female listeners on your podcast to embrace that ambitious attitude. Because I think as women, we sometimes tone things down a bit. We're a lot more cautious than our male counterparts. But for Womvest, my dream would be that we'd be operating not only in South Africa, but perhaps in 5 years in 2 or 3 other regions in sub-Saharan Africa, providing this type of capital to a broader set of SMEs.
Fantastic. And seeing what you've achieved in such a short space of time, definitely in 5 years' time, the sky's the limit, and I believe you will achieve big things. So definitely looking forward to keeping in touch and seeing how things develop and how the facility develops as well and the new markets and reach that you'll achieve.
Quote of the week.
I'm not sure if you are prepared, but as people, we often have quotes, mantras, proverbs, or even affirmations that keep us going when times are challenging or when times are good. Do you have one that keeps you going that you'd like to share today?
That is a very interesting one. I will say this, and just because it's top of mind as we speak about finance, I truly believe as investment professionals, we have an incredibly important role to play in terms of economic development as a conduit of impact as well. And we are in service to the real innovators and business builders of this world, who are really the ones who are responsible for taking care of our communities and protecting our natural ecosystems. So although that's not necessarily a mantra or a quote, it is really something that's close to my heart. And it is why I do what I do.
Thank you for sharing that with us, Maya. Brilliant. And I agree 100%. Unfortunately, we're coming to the close of the conversation today. I was hoping before we go, do you have any final closing remarks, calls to action for people who are interested in what you're doing at Womvest or are looking to enter the space in terms of entrepreneurship or investment in terms of focusing on supporting women?
Yeah, I absolutely encourage anybody who's listening and who is interested in Womvest or in the space to visit our website, www.womvest.club, or check us out on LinkedIn and Instagram at Womvest. We're quite active and we're constantly looking for ways to partner with women who are doing incredible things and who want to give back to, other women making the wave. So get in touch with us.
Thank you for joining me on the podcast today. That's been a very timely, meaningful, and much needed conversation. I've definitely enjoyed it, and it's been great learning a lot more about what you do, the great work you're doing in South Africa, and your future plans. So, thank you for taking the time out today to join me on the podcast.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. It's been fantastic.
Thank you, Maya, and look forward to keeping in touch and speaking soon.
Absolutely. Thanks. Bye.
Thank you to everyone who has listened and stayed tuned to the podcast. If you've enjoyed this episode, please subscribe, share, or tell a friend about it. You can also rate, review us in Apple Podcasts or wherever you download your podcast. Thank you, and see you next week for the Unlocking Africa podcast.